There you are. I met you.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. So let me introduce you to everybody. Mariah Barnhart, she is the founder and CEO of Cannabis, and she'll tell us all about that. Mariah's daughter, Dahlia, was diagnosed with brain cancer when she was 2, and the chemo and the treatment was just devastating to her, on Dahlia. And then the then illegal cannabis oil had remarkable effects. And so Mariah founded Cannabis in 2014, I believe, in order to advocate for legalization of medical marijuana. She just has a remarkable journey, and she's a remarkable woman. She's brilliant and strong and kind and generous. I love Mariah, and I'm so honored that she's here with us today to share her story. So you're in for a treat. Mariah, I'm turning it over to you. Let me
Thank you
share
so
your
much.
screen if you choose to. All right.
That was a great introduction. I am just a mom, and keeping friends like you is kind of what keeps me going. If you surround yourself with experts and you're never the smartest person in the room, you get a lot done. And I've learned that along the way for sure. As you already stated, my daughter Dahlia was diagnosed with brain cancer at the age of 2 in 2013. Our home state is Florida, and we went to several different hospitals here before going to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Tennessee. So neither medical cannabis nor hemp were legal in Florida or Tennessee at the time. And hemp was also a gray area. It had to be imported, and even then it wasn't 100% legal. So we didn't have a lot of options. Early on in Dahlia's journey, cannabis hadn't been, even the low THC, which was actually hemp stuff early on, hadn't been on CNN. We hadn't, really made contact with a lot of other parents. So there were, stories of adults who used cannabis, back from, if you are looking back through history, specifically of this country where prohibition started, and the AIDS epidemic and the use of cannabis in adults was primarily what we were going off of. There really is no medical good option with conventional medicine for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. The weight loss that you are going to see from that, the atrophy of legs, inability to walk, all the things that come from not having proper nutrition and being, doused with toxic chemotherapy. And it's just a really bad combination with children with really aggressive cancers. What the general school of thought is you throw as much toxicity into their body as possible while trying to keep them like just one step from death. And because chemotherapy doesn't differentiate, we're just not there yet with science, it doesn't differentiate between cancerous and healthy cells. So you're killing healthy cells along the way. And with brain cancers, like my daughter was diagnosed with, you're killing healthy brain cells as well. So early in her diagnosis, it was all just do what you had to do at that moment to save her life. Here in Florida, with multiple life-saving brain surgeries, all within the first week or so of diagnosis. Most children aren't diagnosed with cancer until they're really bad off. Kids are resilient. They go through weird stages. So Dahlia had symptoms. She really never started to talk. And at 2 years old, her doctors weren't too concerned and said it was because I babied her. She was clumsy, and they said that was because of growth spurts. And she never slept. They wanted to diagnose her with ADHD, and I knew something was wrong with trying to prescribe a 2-year-old psychotropic medications. I had done enough research on psychiatric medications to know that they come with a slew of side effects, dangerous side effects, in children specifically, homicide and suicide. And I just knew something was wrong, but I'm not a medical professional. As a mom, I think we've seen the resurgence of the doctor mom, the moms who are a little more empowered to trust their gut. And I like to think that that's going to stay. That's been the last few years, and cannabis had a lot to do with that. So Dahlia's story has been told a million times. You can find it on YouTube. I'll keep that part kind of brief. She was very, very sick. She was dying and being resuscitated by the time we got to St. Jude. She had to be rushed into emergency surgeries several times. And every symptom and side effect of chemotherapy that you can imagine, she experienced. So of course, there's the traditional hair loss and feeling weak and being sick and vomiting and nausea and things of that nature. But she also experienced some of the more dramatic side effects of really high dose chemotherapy. And she was on several different high dose toxic chemicals at this time. So bleeding, open wounds from the tips of her lip down her entire gastrointestinal tract. She, kind of became a zombie. She was already experiencing brain damage from the surgeries. And I think that was quickly worsened by the toxic drugs that are made to get into the brain for brain cancers. And I let that go on for months. I looked into the ketogenic diet. Kids are not allowed to be on any dietary restrictions while they're on chemotherapy, because really our only option other than food is nutritional drips, which is pure sugar anyway. So they try to keep them eating through this process as much as possible. We looked into graviola. There's only one of those plants that really has any chemotherapy effects, and it's neurotoxic and will kill you. So, there were just a lot of, I was raised in natural and alternative medicine. So I got to see early on that alternative medicine is just as money hungry and corrupt as conventional medicine in many ways. So you have to be careful with that. And I'm a huge proponent of science, but I also am a huge proponent of personal freedoms and rights. And so balancing that as a mother, I had no rights in the care of my daughter. I was told early on that if I said no to anything that was considered life-saving, the state would come take custody of her and she would undergo those treatments without her mom by her side. So really my rights were extremely limited. And in Florida and Tennessee, like I already said, cannabis and hemp were both illegal. So in Tennessee, rushed into another emergency surgery from St. Jude to a hospital up the street, Le Bonheur. She came out of that surgery with no pain medicine because she was previously very hard to resuscitate after stopping breathing. And the pain medicines available in that emergency situation were all respiratory depressants. So cannabis is not a respiratory depressant. And at that time, the medical professionals were devastated. They were heartbroken. There were several of them crying. I mean, this little kid just went through surgery through her skull and couldn't have any pain medicine. And that was when I started using cannabis illegally. People from around the country had shipped me homemade products from their kitchen. It wasn't anything like it is today. There were no tested products from legitimate sources and dispensaries. You had to just meet new people and decide if you trusted them or not. It was a very, very hard place to be, especially as a mom, especially if anything had been contaminated with heavy metals or some of the things that we see today, even in very clean hemp products. The Florida Department of Agriculture has been testing some of the hemp products that tested clean, and then after being bottled are contaminated with heavy metals and things of that nature. So that's, a story for another day. We have issues that we need to, as an industry, come together and solve. But at this point in time, there was just none of that. It was somebody was kind enough to illegally ship you cannabis from across the country of a product they made in their kitchen and or imported hemp products. That was basically what was available to us. And because I had been very public about Dahlia's story, and even if I hadn't chosen to use cannabis, once I found out that it was illegal to the degree it was, and that I didn't have that option for something that I read hundreds of studies. I talked to Professor Raphael Meshulam from Israel, who I didn't know at the time is one of the most renowned scientists in the world of cannabis. And I talked to Dr. El Soli from the University of Mississippi, the only federally approved program to grow cannabis here in the United States. And I talked to these people who at the time, unbeknownst to me are, famous for what they do, but they just treated me like a family member. And they told me what they would do in my situation, what they thought. They helped me to read through the studies and to see that, I asked Dr. Osoli, the last question I asked him before trying cannabis was, am I imagining this? This is what I'm reading. This is what the science says. The United States government patented cannabis as an antioxidant and a neuroprotectant in the 90s, at the same time that they were sending money to Israel to fund these studies of these scientists that I was talking to. So they knew for a fact it had medical benefits, but they refused to reschedule it. As a Schedule 1 drug, it has no medicinal benefits and is the most dangerous drug known to mankind, which everybody with any common sense knows it's not dangerous. But as for the medicinal benefits, I wasn't aware until I started reading the research, until I was backed in a corner with a dying daughter. And I didn't want any other parent to ever experience that their child suffered needlessly because they were ignorant, which was the situation I was in. So I made it a mission going forward to continue to be public about Dahlia's story. I already was going to have, trauma-induced issues. Clearly, watching your daughter die and be resuscitated, your only job in life after you become a parent is to protect your children. You no longer have any of those capabilities. The type of PTSD, I think one day they're going to create, they have CPTSD being discussed now for long-term abuse generally in childhood. I think there's going to be a new type of PTSD for caregivers, people who are helpless and watching someone else suffer, because there's really such important caveats to that specific situation. And a lot of us are in it, whether you're an adult caring for your elderly parents, or in my situation, the worst of the worst is watching your own child suffer and believing that they're going to die suffering, not knowing why they were being tortured, why you were doing this to them. She was too young to understand what was going on and felt like she just woke up one day and maybe had done something wrong and was being punished. And there was no way to explain to her that we were trying to save her life. And I just really, really didn't want any other parent to ever feel that way. So I reached out and I would have conversations with other parents. I would share the science in layman's terms with them. That kind of became my job, was to discuss with the scientists what the science meant, so that then I could go to other parents and explain it to them in a way that they could understand, and explain to them how I, if I were in their situation, would share with my doctors. You really do want the medical team to be your team. You want to be leading that team. And a lot of parents early on, when they were finding arguments from their medical professionals, instead of making them part of their team, they were then their enemies. And special needs parents already have a very high risk of having CPS or DCF involved in our lives. The statistics are outrageous. Special needs kids, end up with bruises and cuts and injuries at a much higher rate than non-special needs children. And that's part of the reason, but also there's a lot of medical bullying that goes on. I, in fact, have been threatened to have CPS called on me. And I'm very fortunate that I have the friends that I do, and that I know and understand how to contact boards of entire hospitals and, go far above these people. Because to me, that type of bullying, I can handle that, but I have to really handle it in a way that no other parent behind me is going to experience those same things from those same medical professionals. And in doing that, I realized that the more parents that you were interacting with and having these discussions with, the more parents felt comfortable coming out and telling their own stories. And I started watching and observing over the course of a few months, and a couple things happened. One, Dahlia's neuro-oncologist at the world's leading cancer research hospital, who initially did not want to discuss cannabis with me at all, had no prior knowledge of its medicinal benefits, and really wasn't interested in reading, our job here is to save this little girl, and you're bringing me stuff about marijuana. And after watching Dahlia's swift recovery, she had never seen, I don't think, in all of her decades of doing this, you're trying to help these kids. And when you see something with your own eyes that provides that relief, even if all it did was make her feel better, at that point, that's all you want for this child. Morphine gets you high as a kite, comes from the opium plant, and that's literally its only purpose. And we use that like candy for people of all ages, including these little children. And it's dangerous and it's deadly, whereas cannabis is not. And so she actually left St. Jude to head up cannabis research in another state, where she ended up sitting on the governor's commission to further cannabis legislation in that state, and then moved to another state where she's helping thousands of people, children at a pediatric hospital, doing this research. And so that was really meaningful to me, because it told me that for all the drama that I was incurring, on top of the trauma I was going to be experiencing, the PTSD, the fear for my own daughter's life, and now being public about this, fearing every night, every time I heard a helicopter was someone going to raid my house? Was my daughter going to lose me? I had another child, obviously, to worry about, who I already felt was being neglected for me having to focus on my daughter. And I just knew that one day I was going to be in prison. So that was I was watching my daughter breathe to make sure she didn't stop breathing while listening to helicopters. I was just a crazy wreck. But watching that doctor leave and do the good that she did, let me know. I, basically was just asking for a sign from the universe, in which direction to go. And that to me meant everything, because of Dahlia's story, that doctor is now helping thousands of other children and furthering research, which is going to help hundreds of thousands and millions more in the future, right? So one person just doing what they know is right can affect a lot of other things, which we don't often get to see that in life. And from there was creating Cannabis. Now we had these moms who were comfortable telling their stories, and observing that it wasn't giving the politicians much to go against. I mean, it was really creating an atmosphere of pulling at heartstrings. So I felt like, you have the logical fallacy there when you're arguing and you're doing it based on emotion. So what I tried to do was to inject the science into those emotional stories, because then you have nothing. You have nothing to back up why you're still pro-prohibition at that point, and especially for medical. So I went to Colorado about 6 months into her treatment, just a couple of months after she started cannabis. I went to Colorado with the agreement that I would continue chemotherapy at home with her, and she would be seen by the local hospital in Colorado regularly, and that she would be on cannabis. And what I found there was not this big. At this point, the first CNN documentary had just come out. And even though it was on hemp, and I knew it was hemp kind of being falsely advertised as cannabis, I was just under the impression that there would be like this utopia in Colorado where you could just get whatever you wanted and live a free life. That was not the case at all. It would have been thousands of dollars a month to go the legal route. And even then, the testing wasn't great. The product availability wasn't great. If you found something that did work for you, you weren't likely to be able to find it a second time. It was still very much the Wild West. And if I was going to do this illegally, I was going to come home and have my daughter around her family and friends. Nobody knew how this was going to go for her, if treatment was going to work. She was doing a lot better. She was enjoying living life, which at that point, when you're, as a parent, put in the position to have to choose between saving your child's life and saving their quality of life, that is an unimaginable position to be in. And there were several times that I felt that those were the choices I was making. And quality of life is so important, because I have watched, starting Cannabis and working with other parents like me, I have laid with children while they've died. I've helped parents put funerals together. And the most, you never want to compare. Everyone deals with pain differently. But the most, to me, unimaginable situation to be in, losing a child. That's a really difficult spot to be in. But losing a child while they're suffering, that they weren't at the beach and playing with their cousins and enjoying life, that to me, I never could imagine it. And that drove me so much harder. I got these parents together and said, these stories are really changing hearts and minds. And that's something you're going to see that's happened in society over the last 7 years since this started for us, is even if you don't care about cannabis at all, even if it's never meant anything to you, you've never had someone in your life so sick that may have benefited, or you don't really believe, it's touted as a cure-all and that turns you off and you're done, use it as a litmus test for politicians. Once the majority has decided on something, that then becomes, which in our lifetimes, this is one of the only things that's become so heavily decided upon by the masses. Once the masses decide upon something, you can then use that as a test for politicians. Do you believe you're appointed by God and your opinion supersedes the will of the people? Because you are a servant. You're here to serve us, and you're here to implement the will of the people. So at this point in history, we've come to a crossroads that we're probably not going to see again in our lifetimes. I say that, but there are a few other major issues that you're going to see being addressed from this. So as we've moved forward, the message that the war on drugs is a war on Black people, that minority demographics have been much more harshly harmed by prohibition and the war on drugs and things like that. You're going to start seeing all of that come. But it was my belief then, and still is now, that medical had to come first. And as medical was being pushed forward, we started to see, well, a politician saying, you know, oh, someday someone's going to be using this for back pain. You guys are young and you might have no idea, but back pain will ruin your life. Living in pain will ruin your life. Quality of life is so important. So when you're talking about things like pain, and you're talking about the opioid epidemic, you're talking about addiction in this country, you're talking about even just Xanax and psychiatric drugs for anxiety, depression, you know, these things will ruin your life. People commit suicide every single day. We have to start taking into consideration that quality of life is as important as saving lives. And that's kind of the next step in this, is they've made the medical program in Florida so difficult that when these patients start coming out and saying, look, we can't afford this, we are disabled and cannot drive 200 miles to the first licensed cannabis recommending doctor in the state that's closest to us, this is unrealistic, you're going to see adult use basically be pushed off of them intentionally going against the will of the people to try to keep the medical program from being a usable, workable program. To, you've pushed people too far. No one believes that cannabis is dangerous anymore. And even though you're going to hear from doctors who talk about, probably are some of my very good friends, talk about some of the dangers, every single chemotherapy drug is known to cause nerve damage, brain damage, and death. Every single benzo that these kids with seizures are on is deadly, and the withdrawals from them are even deadly. Morphine for pain given to everyone is deadly. Every opioid that everyone. So even though, you know, the doctors are going to be real cautious and conservative, and we need that science. Like I said, I'm a proponent. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You can be a proponent of freedom and personal rights and telling these politicians that we need to get them back in line. They're our servants. And at the same time, be a proponent of science and conventional medicine, and know that conventional medicine isn't always right, and it's always learning. It's a practice for a reason. It's one of the leading causes of death in America is medical malpractice. Our doctors aren't the end all be all, but it's great, in my opinion. I have so many educated doctor friends so that we can have these discussions, and then I can bring in a scientist and say, here's the science, here's the doctor, here's me as the layman. Like, how can we bring all of this together so that people are more educated to feel powerful in their convictions, in their voting, in their politicians, knowing, you know, what their politicians have and haven't done and what that really says about them. So I think it's changed the entire paradigm of society. I think that we are a much more aware society. People who already mistrusted the government mistrust them a lot more now, but we're doing something about it. It's not just conspiracy theories and crazy ideas. I think people are really starting to take action and to see that there are ways to take action. You know, in my opinion, holding up signs and having big protests and things like that serve a purpose. I've been an activist my entire life, and even though that's a dirty word now, it wasn't when I was a kid. And everything from female genital mutilation overseas to the psychiatric drugging of children at a very young age, that was one of my main issues. And I think that people are starting to see that there are other ways that you can take action that don't allow these politicians to get away with what they're doing. We're holding not just the politicians accountable, but as we open up an industry, this is the first really community-based industry I think we're seeing. It's the first industry we're seeing created in our lifetime. All these other industries have always existed. But you're seeing a whole movement of self-care, of mothers taking back the health of their children and saying, you know, I'm going to trust my gut on this, or I'm going to get a second opinion and see another doctor. You didn't really see a lot of that in, well, you guys are younger than me, but in my parents' age range, and especially grandparents. So we're starting to see, with technology opening up and, you know, the activists who, I worked from, who had been doing this for decades before, the medical professionals, the scientists, all of this is kind of culminating in a once in a lifetime observation that we're getting to see all of these ways to change laws, to get politicians voted out, to bring to the voters' attention what politicians are and aren't doing what. These litmus tests like cannabis, we didn't really have that before. Like even if you're not a single issue voter, we didn't have a single issue with which you could base whether a politician believed he was serving the will of the people or his own personal bias and beliefs. And we have that now. So I really want to open up to conversation and questions, because that's my story as a mom and as a layman, and my belief on how cannabis affected society and what we're seeing today. Do any of you have any questions or comments on that?
Oh, it's such a powerful story. So thank you for sharing that. And anybody, throw in your questions.
How's your daughter doing?
She's doing amazing. So she is actually still on treatment, but with the science that has come as far as it has since she was diagnosed, she's on a very mild, with barely any side effects, genetic inhibitor, as opposed to a traditional chemotherapy. She was diagnosed with a mixed grade tumor. So she was treated initially for a very high grade aggressive and generally considered untreatable tumor. And even with treatment having stopped on cannabis, we saw shrinkage and death of that in the first year and a half. And so she was off treatment for a while, and the new growth that they noted was a slow growing, it kind of looked like an optic pathway glioma, which is a low grade, slow growing tumor. So she was on one chemotherapy trial after that, which was failed. And she is on technically her fourth trial, though it's the same drug as her third trial now. And she's just doing great. She cognitively cannot read. I don't think she can even say the full alphabet in one sitting, has a difficult time with things like that, but talks like a 40-year-old, and you would never know. I mean, she talks like an adult. So some parts of her brain picked up slack for the other parts that were damaged, but even the damaged parts of her brain, we've seen kind of growth and repair that we really didn't expect to see. So she's doing great. Thank you for asking.
Anyone else?
How old is she now?
She just turned 10 on the 25th.
So you've been an activist doing this activist your whole life, but for this in 2014, how have you seen the cannabis industry and cannabis medicinal marijuana industry and the people involved change? So do you have a different, are the people who were involved in 2014 different than the people who were involved in 2020?
Yes, somewhat. I mean, I try to take in and give from different perspectives, because I also have an understanding of capitalism and industry, but I come from a place of activism and community. And I think that we saw an industry grab early on. I think that some of the entities that we saw as, maybe they positioned themselves as community-based were actually industry-oriented early on. What we've seen in Florida is we were just desperate to get something done. The politicians promised us they would, and then they didn't, and they forced us. I actually wasn't a proponent of the first go-around with the amendment, but my daughter was being used for that. Her story was on the news for that. And I am a Southern girl. I believe in not changing the Constitution and doing these types of things through the legislative process. And in working with some of these politicians, it was just clear to see that the corruption was so deep that the will of the people really was not being taken into account. So we were going to have to go to our neighbors and convince them. And so we hit heavily. I've been on the St. Jude board for so many years. I helped the YMCA create their first pediatric cancer survivorship program. I'm super community oriented. And some of the moms that we chose to work closely with, getting the pastors' wives to come pray over the plants and talk to their churches, and the PTA moms to talk to the schools. One of the heaviest hit demographics that we went after was the schools and the school board, and getting the policies implemented there. And I think that you've seen this shift from having to feign. Because the thing is in capitalism, I always tell people, I try to be really honest about this. Like, please don't meet me and tell me that you got into cannabis because your brother's sister's ex-brother-in-law's daughter had a seizure once. Like, I am a somewhat intelligent human being, and that actually really offends me. If you came and sat down with me and said, I'm here to make money, I would say, great. This is how you can help me do the things that we need to do with the nonprofit sector and or, community wise. And this is how that would help you. Those are the kinds of conversations that we're having today. We saw this huge takeover of industry. We saw so much corruption in the legislative process, which you'll see that I'm actually personal friends with a lot of the people who were involved in that kind of stuff early on. And those are just open, honest discussions from my end. I think that, I had one time Vice wanted to do a documentary on or a reality TV. Someone actually approached me for a reality TV show. Can you imagine, with like a daughter on chemotherapy? And some people would have said yes to that. I've met some really weird parents also along the way. You have to remember, just because somebody is a parent doesn't make them a good person. And just because somebody has a sick kid doesn't make them a good person. I learned those lessons the really, really hard way very early on. And then with industry, kind of the same thing. You had a lot of people approach you and you couldn't really tell what their agenda was. I so appreciate it when people just come and lay their agenda out. But what we've seen from that corruption, the licensing process on to today, is kind of a give and take. You've seen a lot more corruption. Once they come in and take their piece that they do, now they have a lot more money and a lot more to keep the corruption going. But also, like you'll see now, Cookies just bought one of our licenses that was not being used here in Florida. They're super recreational oriented. They're super community oriented. They're out of California. They're going to come in and crush it. So you're still going to see a lot of like people that you love from other parts of the country who are activist oriented coming in and getting these huge licenses and doing the right thing. A lot of these companies have done give backs and sponsorships of events. And I think I must just be a really hard person to say no to, because a lot of these people have sponsored our little events. We co-authored the first CME program for physicians in the state of Florida. And a lot of the bigger MMTCs sponsored that, even though like what are they really getting in return for that? But you are seeing now also that you're going to have to offer big returns to get anything from the MMTCs. And as that moves forward, you're going to start seeing a big push for opening the market. Right now, we're in a very tightly closed, vertically integrated market. And as time goes on, in fact, I'm hoping to talk to Senator Brandis here shortly and some of the senators who are kind of on our side historically. I know Matt Gaetz kind of shifted his perspective at some point. And so he might, be someone to talk to and befriend. But some of these politicians are working on opening up the market. DeSantis, when he came in, said that he wanted to do that. Obviously, we haven't seen any movement, but also we have to be accountable. That's our job. For me, when I get tired, I just remember, if I want to see change, it's my job to push it through. And if I'm too tired to do it, then don't complain about it. It's no one else's job. And so these are things we're going to continue to push as we move forward. We're going to, push for an open market, a horizontal market, which means if someone's growing cannabis, a vertically integrated market means if you grow cannabis, you're the only person who can extract or touch that cannabis, and you're the only person who can sell that to the public. And so with adult use, you have a little bit of a difference just in that any adult can go get it. They don't have to be on a registry. You can't look up their license plate number and see that they're on the registry, which sheriffs and police officers can do now. Seems like a huge violation of rights, but that's the way it is in Florida. And so you're going to start seeing a push for adult use. But simultaneously, if adult use passed tomorrow, only the MMTCs, the medical marijuana treatment centers who are licensed today, I think 22, only those people will be able to sell it. So it's still a huge step forward in that people aren't feeling their rights are being violated, or they have to travel 100 miles to see a cannabis recommending doctor and things of that nature. But you're also going to see a push for making the market horizontal, where someone else can grow it and then sell it to a dispensary, or an extractor can come in, and it creates so many jobs. We're in a place right now with this pandemic has probably helped move this movement forward greatly. In one respect, you're talking about the suicide rate that's gone up, I think, 20% just in quarantine time or in the pandemic time frame. And so those are conversations that are going to start to be had. We don't have great psychiatric drugs right now. We love to tout that we do. And I, you know, as a layman, let me just say, I'm obviously not a doctor, but go research it yourself. Talk to really, really honest medical professionals who aren't making their living prescribing psych drugs. And you're going to find homicide. Some of those people probably went and did get help. They knew they were depressed. And then suicide was a side effect of their psychiatric medication. So you're going to start seeing this kind of common sense become even more prevalent, where people are going, wait a minute, something's wrong. If everything we have available today is still leaving us as crappy as we are right now, we need better options. But also we need an open market. We need horizontal integration. We've lost so many jobs. The economy is crashing. We have people who are just devastated financially, economically. So that's going to be a huge push for opening jobs, which is letting the farmers do what they do and farm. Let them sell it to dispensaries. Let people open up their own dispensaries, mom and pop shops, rather than, you know, just huge conglomerates. So it's going to be interesting. I love some of the owners of some of the MMTCs today. I love some of the investors. I love some of the people involved. But what's right is right. At the end of the day, we're historically a Republican supermajority state. That should tell you something. Republican supermajority means focused on economy, tourism, and money. And if we're not seeing a market that allows for those things, that's your huge red flag that there's some digging to do, that there's some corruption going on.
Oh, thank you. So there's questions showing up in the chat, and I don't know if you can see them. So I'm just
I can't.
So John, I'm going to go in order. Will you? Can you ask your question?
Myself. All right. So yeah. So I know that you've been fairly active within the state, but my question is more on the federal level. How long do you think, or do you, being that you've been involved, see it before the federal laws start changing to catch up to what the states have been doing?
So actually, probably 4 months into my daughter's diagnosis, I petitioned the Obama administration federally. So I knew from the start, out of all of the thousands of hours of research I did, scientists I talked to, doctors, et cetera, I knew this was a federal issue. It is federally Schedule 1, which means no medicinal benefits, most dangerous drug. And I knew until we descheduled it federally that these state laws were going to be gray. You were going to have corrupt politicians coming in and doing what we've seen in Florida, et cetera. And then I saw that there was a domino effect. And I started researching previous, alcohol prohibition, researching previous legislation, and that this domino effect, when most states embrace legislation, how that affects federal. So right now you have some really awesome people, actually some from Florida. One, Jose Bellins from Florida, a good friend of mine from Georgia is on this, but there's a federal lawsuit that's been going on that you hear about in the news every here and there. But that federal lawsuit, we didn't really expect it to do anything, but I shouldn't say that. We expected it to move the ball forward. And that's exactly what it's doing right now, but we're actually seeing it do more than we thought it would, and it's still in court instead of having been thrown out. So that's really awesome. The fact that the government patented, when Clinton signed off on a patent application in the early 90s for cannabis as a neuroprotectant and antioxidant, and then continued to schedule it a Schedule 1 drug, that should be an open and closed lawsuit. That's not what this lawsuit specifically is about, but with all of the lawyer friends I have, it just seems like that right there, that evidence should be enough to say something is wrong. Let me look at this. Federally, I think that we're looking at, in Florida, we won't even have adult use until 2024 if we can't get the 2022 stuff going. And at that point, you have so many other states, this election next year, legalizing adult use, which is kind of the big push for federal. You had Booker in there really talking about that the war on drugs is historically meant to keep minority communities down, and it's an oppressive prohibition in and of itself, but the war on drugs as a whole is oppressive for all these different reasons. And those messages are starting to be heard. So I really believe in the next decade, we're going to see huge shifts federally. What we saw with the Farm Bill was amazing, and it's exactly what we wanted. Well, not exactly, nothing's perfect, but it descheduled hemp. So what we really want to see, even if it's just on a state level to start, is the descheduling of cannabis. Everyone wants to reschedule it because then you can still keep it as a commodity that's going to make you money. Because as a Schedule II drug or Schedule III drug, you still can't just grow it in your backyard. But I think we're going to see state by state, adult use, home grow, eventual descheduling is what we're really after. So I think that we're all going to need to have to sit down together and have those discussions over the coming years of what the best way, because rescheduling might actually make this worse. So we would really like to see federal out of it completely, and state by state, then, we have some work to do.
Thank you. Gabby, I see you're next. Would you like to ask your question? Turning off mute.
Oh, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my mute button. But yeah, I had dropped a question in the chat, but I just wanted to say first, your entire story is so incredibly inspiring and just absolutely amazing. It really brought me to tears at one point. And then at one point I was like I really went through all the emotions: frustration, happiness, sadness, happy tears. So, I really want to thank you for the work that you've done and the road that you've really paved for, women in cannabis as a first, but really as a representation of a whole in what can be really beneficial for children struggling with life-threatening illnesses. And that in and of itself is incredible and absolutely amazing. And I just want to know, for the younger generation specifically, I guess really, millennials and maybe older Gen Z, what steps and what should we really be listening to in order to kind of continue our education and kind of aid in that same fight that we're really facing every day as far as making sure that cannabis has the right representation?
So that's a really loaded question.
I know.
And it's one that would get me kicked out of many subgroups of this community, because no one has the same opinion as anyone else on what the representation should be. And in fact, I'm sure that there are plenty of people who hate looking at me, and they just think I am so, what's the word for when you're like made up and you dress up? And actually that's not even how I am historically in my real life. So I very much was raised by alternative and natural and Irish setter rescues inside the house and animal, and so I really do actually mesh with that part of our community really, really well. But I also felt that, and I'm not traditionally a PTA mom, like I was a soccer mom for many, many years. And it's so funny because some of the women who met me while I was doing that, I was like, I got every dad to agree to be the coach so that I could just do the emailing and sit in my car and never got out or associated with anyone. But I knew that image was the image that mainstream America needed to see. And so for me personally, those decisions, like what woman wants to feel like you should have to shave and wear makeup for, a senator to be able to even hear what you're saying? It's offensive, but those aren't battles that are as important to me as this one was. And so meeting in the middle, knowing when you go to a Senate hearing that whether it's right or wrong, and it's wrong, there is a certain, type of image that these senators are more willing to listen to, that media will put anyone on because they're controversial. Right. But when you're on that media, are these everyday people going to hear what you're saying, believe you? Are you really going to open their ears? Because the way we look, in my opinion, opens people's ears. And that's sad and it's horrible. And if you study psychology, there is a lot to that. And so I would just suggest people looking a little bit into the psychology of that. And I actually am about to post on Instagram. I've been back and forth on it because I'm old. So social media as an advocacy platform for me, I've only ever used Facebook, and that was tremendous. I truly believe that's how we got cannabis passed in the state of Florida. And going forward, that is our saving grace, is social media. But I don't really know how to use the other platforms. So on Instagram, I'm going to post today, I think, something about how to be an activist. And I tried to do it in the most non-controversial way possible, because a vet with PTSD does not want to be told that him coming in, looking a certain way and smelling like he's been smoking, that he doesn't want to be told that that's not, his story is just as valid, you know? And so you have to be really careful and let people be who they are, with trying to just say, this is what worked for me. This is what I was willing to do, and how that benefited me. I got into a lot of meetings I should not have been in. I got a lot of people talking to me who, like, even just the fact that I have these personal conversations with someone like Raphael Meshulam or Dr. Al-Soli, or all these years later, I can recognize that that was not a room I belonged in. That was not a table I had a seat at. But these people were willing to give me that space, and there's a reason why. And sometimes, not with those people specifically, but especially working with the kind of politicians that we've got in the state of Florida, you'll notice a different receipt of you as a person. And, you know, be willing to meet in the middle, study a little bit about the psychology of marketing, or how that works, why people's brains work that way. Because even a mom who's like slovenly, like me most days, in sweats, they resonate with someone that doesn't look exactly like them for some reason. And like your trust and credibility is all affected by the psychology of how people are perceiving you. And so I would say, if you really want to affect change, now if you want to be famous, you just do whatever you want, because people love controversy and extremism. So you go all in on a political party and you yell and scream and you look however you want, and you'll be famous. But if you really want to do the work and affect real change, then you're going to have to meet in the middle on some things. And that would be my greatest advice, is that not every stage is our stage, but stages that we believe are ours require certain meeting in the middle. And that's I guess, my least controversial way to describe my opinion on that.
Well, I want to have a whole hour discussion just on that issue.
Yeah.
I'm going to write a book, How to Be an Activist, but then everyone's going to hate me, because it's like, you can't do anything right these days. So
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. No, please do. I would buy it. I would. Thank you so much
Lisa,
for your answer.
Thank
Lisa,
you.
you're up next. Would you like to ask your question? Jennifer's taking time to find their mute switch, but Lisa Dominique.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mariah, so much for your time today. I was just curious, do you have any opinion on the MORE Act vote being delayed in Congress? It's basically, it would deschedule cannabis completely. So I wanted to hear your take on that.
Yeah, and again, you try to be non-offensive when you say these things, but I don't think we expected it to really go anywhere. So all of these things are moving the ball forward, but you can tell when you start researching, if this is something you guys are really getting into and are interested in, you can tell by who sponsors and co-sponsors the bill how far it's going to go, and that's a sad truth. And so based on the support of a bill, and even if you were just a mathematics person and you wanted to put together the number of who and what, unfortunately, this has been made a partisan issue. And I will say one thing we really did successfully that I have not seen in my lifetime with any issue is they were really trying to make this a partisan issue early on. The Democratic Party picked this up as a partisan issue. And so Republicans immediately were going to be against it, right? And we really pushed past that. We made it such a nonpartisan issue that the Democratic Party actually now, which has its pros and cons, and actually I'm a little upset about, but they've dropped it. It's no longer a Democratic Party issue. But I think that's great too, because we have to work across party lines if we're going to get anything done. Like I said, if you want to be famous and you want to be known and you want money and power, then you go after something to the extreme and you make that, you claim a party in a 50-50 nation and you stick to it and you just go all in. But if you really want to affect change, you've got to work across party lines. So if you have a really important issue, don't ever let it become partisan. And so now we're going to have to do the same thing we did with medical, is to make this such an issue of compassion that it can no longer be turned into a partisan issue, so that Republicans aren't just saying no because it's a Democratic Party issue or whatever. But I think that it was not expected to go too far anyway. And that's really sad. I actually did my last reach out last month. I don't know, as one person, sometimes I just don't have what it takes to make something well known. And nobody was writing into their legislators. Nobody was writing into their reps and senators on behalf of this bill. Nobody knew it existed. And we're in quarantine. So media is really, heavy on the pandemic and the election. And so getting something like the MORE Act in, we're going to have to be a little creative. And moving forward, what you're going to see, I actually created a company, High Heel, for the moms. What I saw with the moms with these sick kids is they were just not taking care of themselves to the degree that, I don't know if you heard the story of the mom in Miami with the autistic son who she drowned him twice and was otherwise considered a great mother, was beloved in the community. Nobody knows what happened. People are not okay. And with that, I have a lot more leeway. With Cannabis, I had to be very medically oriented and stay in my lane and tiptoe. And with High Heel, that was basically, an organization for women, self-care, women healing women, those kinds of things. And that has given me a lot more leeway we're kind of getting some stuff together for the state of Florida. We're, like I said, going to be talking to politicians about the adult use legislation, which, whether we think it's going to go far or not, is going to move the ball forward continuously over the next few years until we most likely are going to have to get a ballot initiative passed. And I think that I don't think the MORE Act is going anywhere. And I hate to say that because you don't want to dampen people's excitement about writing in, but I think our chance to write into our legislators is kind of come and gone. I would still love to see people doing that. If there's hyper excitement about it, perhaps we get it a little bit further, but we have so much other stuff going on right now and they're intentionally ignoring it. And the stuff with the stimulus packages for COVID and the election and all of this other stuff going on. But, the really good thing about what's going on in society right now is they've said you can't keep ignoring some of these issues. So issues like the war on drugs being a war on Black people, that is not going away. I loved the saying, this is a movement, not a moment, because these kinds of things moving forward, all of these other things that come with it are going to be in the spotlight. You're going to see it in the state of Florida for probably the next 2 or 3 years after the election. So that's the thing, is you also have to give media is not going to do stories on stuff that they don't think viewers are interested in right now. And probably because there wasn't a lot of media coverage of the MORE Act, unfortunately, which was the perfect time in American history to give the spotlight to that kind of legislation. Unfortunately, with everything else going on between the pandemic and riots being covered and the election stuff, it just wasn't covered to the point where it got a lot of hype. But even if it got a ton of hype, the point was mostly to move the ball forward. I think by who was sponsoring, co-sponsoring, and supporting that bill, I think that nobody really expected it to go all the way.
As a scientist, politics kind of drives me crazy, because it's just like the facts of it, the data, the science of it should drive it rather than what you're wearing or
right,
how long you've been in Congress.
But as a neuroscientist specifically, you also understand that the brain is a mysterious thing. And as much as psychology is not a science, it is really interesting to study, because marketing and psychology and all of those things are how people get elected. It's how people get laws passed. And so we do have to find that balance between humanity and science.
Between the reality, and as a neuroscientist, I'm way over on the psychological end. That's always what interested me more. But that is true. And I do think psych is a science. It's just a messier one. Because when
I shouldn't have said it's not a science.
It's actually harder to do psychological science than it is neuroscience. It's because you have to control for human beings and all their wackiness.
That's right.
But I find it so frustrating that something like it won't pass because, well, it's the wrong time. It's a crazy time right now, and there's other things that are louder. But it should be just the facts of it. But
right. And like I said, you should be able to take a lawyer. I've reached out to so many attorneys nationwide, you know, in my coming in with my ignorance and, you know, excitement. And, you know, Clinton signed off on a patent application for medical benefits of cannabis. Take that to the federal government, sue them for wrongful scheduling. And that's not how things work. So yeah, we need to come together as a community and be educated together. My thing is, I'm one person. I can talk to and that's, you know, kind of my obligation. I do have access to some of the leading minds, legal minds, science minds. And that's why I feel so obligated to come forward and bring that information out. And if each of us did that, if everyone who had access to anyone with insight, political insight, scientific insight, medical insight, bring that out and share it with other people, because unless we come together, this is never going to get done. It was so draining just to get this done in Florida. So much infighting and community issues, and nobody could agree. And with adult, you've seen the same thing. No two people have agreed on the same adult use initiative, and funding dried up and it's never passed. And now there's going to be an adult use initiative fully funded by corporate interests. And maybe that one will pass just because they have enough money. And that's not what we want to see. We need to, as a community, be willing to meet in the middle and work together.
And a shout out to all you students. I mean, this is one of the reasons we started these classes, is so we're making a generation who's going to go out there.
That's
know
right.
what they're talking about and do what's right. However you feel about it, do what's right.
If I could have it my way, I would only ever talk to college students, because no, that's not what I meant. But I would spend a lot of time talking to college students, because in my opinion, especially kids taking classes like this one, you're open-minded, you're obviously, you know, really want to be educated and do something with that education. And that's so meaningful and powerful. You guys are going to change the world. And if people can start learning to work together and across party lines, and not continue to make issues of compassion partisan issues, we're going to get a lot done in our lifetimes that so many people before us, our parents, our grandparents, their parents, have not seen the kind of change that we're affecting today. And you guys are going to be affecting.
Yeah. And they're just, yeah, you guys are listening, but I love the cannabis students in all the classes. They're smart, they're engaged, they're passionate, they're strong. I feel hope for the future because of you, all of you guys.
Me too.
Yeah. Spencer, I don't know if that was just a question, but I'm glad cannabis is making your girlfriend better, because it helps so many people, and it's just a crime that it's been kept from people.
Well, and everyone rolls their eyes. These politicians talking about people are going to be using it for back pain and rolling their eyes at this and that. Opioids are prescribed across the board for how many different things? Xanax. You can go to your primary care physician, not even a psychiatrist. You can go to your primary care physician and get Xanax for what? Everything. I have social anxiety. I have anxiety when I can't sleep at night. And so the idea that cannabis helps with sleep, it helps with appetite, it helps with pain, it helps with chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, which nothing else. There is no antiemetic on the market today that works for that. So yeah, maybe it's not a cure-all, but anything that comes from nature that's been proven to be safe for thousands of years, first of all, that should be a red flag for people. If the government can come in and say something that grows in nature is illegal, and not only that, but it's been proven safe for thousands of years, and then you take it further and say, oh, but it does have medicinal benefits. In fact, it may be killing cancer cells. It may be repairing nerve damage. It may be doing these things that we don't have drugs today available for. And that's where you start to really uncover government corruption.
Yeah. And the argument, oh, they just want to get high. First of all, no.
Who cares if they did?
So what? So if you
Right.
have a problem with that, then no more alcohol. How about that?
And you know, when I started Cannamoms and was really, really careful with the moms who were going to also be sharing these messages and doing media, I would never have been as comfortable saying what I say today, because I've had 7 years of watching the medicinal benefits of people who didn't qualify under the Florida qualifications and who aren't considered patients. And we do consider sleep medicine, and we do consider psychiatric drugs that we have no idea their mechanisms of action or how they work or why they cause, side effects of suicide and homicide. And so all of these things are considered medicine. And if something's helping you sleep, helping you eat, even if it's just making you feel better, like I said, the huge jump in suicide rates, that's going to be discussed for the entire next part of moving forward with medicine, with psychiatry, with mental health awareness. Self-care has become a really big thing these last few years, which I'm just so grateful for, because that's kind of the next step in cannabis. Is if it just makes someone feel better, it's not hurting anyone, leave them alone.
Yeah. Our rates of anxiety, depression are skyrocketing. And in my drug class, I talk about this and I wave my arms in the air, because our drugs, for the most part, don't work. The antidepressants, they don't work for most people. We don't treat psychiatric disorders. We don't treat mental illness. We don't treat mood disorders at all well in this country. And we kind of shove them under, we don't want to talk about them. There's a stigma on them. And if there's something that people feel good and it's safe, okay.
That's right. If it's just making life a little bit easier for people, life is hard. And we have come to a point in society where people are pretty miserable. I used to say that when I was a kid, and my mom would get so upset and she'd say, people are mostly happy. And I would say, you're seeing a very different world. I'm mostly happy because I do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. Most people are not. And I think that, are you going to have Michelle talk? Michelle Weiner?
Oh, it wasn't, because she was doing business class. I didn't want to overwhelm her.
Well, let me just say, one thing I love about her is that she uses cannabis as a tool. So I feel like people get these crutches. Xanax is a crutch. We know that. Alcohol has always been known as a crutch. We know that. So we have all these crutches throughout our life. But because of those crutches, we're so content that we're not actually addressing the problem. And what I love about some of these physicians coming in and highly integrating the science and working with scientists and doing research, et cetera, is so we're trying to figure out how to take someone's crutch away and then not have them just reintegrate cannabis as a new crutch, but get so much deeper than that with something that's safe and effective. And instead of a crutch, you now have a tool. And so you're giving people toolboxes. And I think that we're seeing that with a lot of the psychedelics. I've not participated in or been a part of any of that, but I've seen a lot of the end of life, and watching people die is really, really difficult. And the first person that you watch die suffering, not, in their sleep and peaceful, but suffering, you're going to know that these laws are ridiculous. We should have anything and everything that's safe and effective available to us. And some of this end of life stuff with the psychedelics and obviously cannabis kind of being lumped in with those. But I think that you're seeing people all of a sudden feel like they have a toolbox. You can know all day long how to take the engine out of a car. But if you don't have the tools to do it, I do not care who you are or how strong you are, you're not getting that engine out of that car. And so some of these medical professionals are coming in and saying, we didn't learn this in medical school, but we're learning it now as we go along with our patients, and we're creating toolboxes for people. And cannabis is a tool. And I really like the idea of that, especially as a tool for self-care. Just if it makes you feel good, no questions asked. It's safe. It's not hurting anyone. Do what you need to do.
Absolutely. And the physicians don't learn about it in med school. It's only like 6 or 9%. I forget which number, but it's incredibly low. But that is their job, is to keep up on what's happening. And it really affects.
Kind of. So also doctors are not pharmacists. And so as much as we like to link drugs and medicine and medical care all kind of together, pharmacists are taught what drugs do. Mm-hmm. And that's not a huge part of medical school. And so even when you're talking about botanicals and receptor systems, the endocannabinoid system, as we know, wasn't even in medical textbooks, a whole receptor system in our body that wasn't in medical textbooks.
The biggest one.
Yeah. So I love my doctor friends. I really lean on experts and consider many of my medical professional friends experts. But that's not to say that you shouldn't trust your own judgment, your gut. And we need to start getting to a place in America where you have the alternatives over here, the conventionals over here. And it's just like Republican, Democrat. You know why they created that is they knew that people needed an enemy. And if you could make it a light enemy that wasn't really like a deadly enemy, and then, you know, that's how the 50-50 nation works. And we do that with just about everything. Because if you want to be famous, be over here or be over here. But if you want to affect real change, you're going to be somewhere over here. And with cannabis, we need to, you know, yes, it should be available to someone in a hospital through an IV. That's medicine. Yes, it should also be available for someone to grow in their backyard and use as they see fit if it helps them sleep at night. I mean, all of the Elon Musks and, you know, scientists and greatest minds of our time that we know use that for sleep or to relax or whatever. We can talk all day long about long-term side effects, but I think we know that there are many more dangerous things available today, from alcohol all the way to prescribed medications. We have the issues of, you know, the war on drugs harming minority communities disproportionately. We have the issue of addiction. We have the issue of opioid deaths. There are so many issues that make this an unwinnable battle. Like, you can't really argue that cannabis shouldn't be legal.
I agree. All right. So are there any, we have just like 2 minutes left. Any final thoughts from any students? Any comments? I don't know if you're going to chime in or write in the.
Just a thank you. I would type, but I was on my phone. Sorry. No, your story, like everybody's saying, is absolutely amazing. And when you have kids, it does change your life. Most of the people in the class are fairly young and are the people that are going to be making these big changes. Like you're saying, it's 5 to 10 years from now. And that's right when people are going to be graduating college, getting into the workforce and doing those things. So truly appreciate your words on that and working in the middle of that. You got my vote if you ever run for office.
No, that's not in my future. But thank you all so much. This was really, for me, this gives me back as much as I give when I'm touring and doing conferences and preaching to the choir. This is really rejuvenating to me. So thank all of you. And also, Martha, you're the kind of person I need in my life. I so appreciate you. Everyone needs people like you in their life. Like I said at the beginning of this, never be the smartest person in the room. Surround yourself with experts. You are so willing to give, to explore your own education. You're being educated as time goes on, as more about the endocannabinoid system is known, more receptors, more information, and you stay on top of that and then are willing to give that to the world. I just appreciate knowing people like you. I appreciate everyone in this class for taking part. You all are going to affect a good portion of the change that we see in our lifetime. So I'm just really appreciative, and thank you for having me.
Oh, all the appreciation goes back to you. So thank you so much. Thank you for everything you do and everything you are.
Likewise.
So thank you, and we're good, and I guess we'll close it out. And all the thank yous in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So,
oh, and you guys reach out to me on social. Someone teach me how to use Instagram, you know?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.